The quiet town of Lakewood, tucked away in the heart of Wisconsin, is known for its laid-back pace of life. It's a place where everyone knows everyone else, and rumors spread quickly through the narrow streets lined with old, faded homes. Lakewoodians pride themselves on their close-knit community, but beneath the surface, hidden truths are rarely made public. On a morning like any other, the sun rose slowly, breaking through thin clouds and casting a warm glow over the town. By then, many of the locals had gone about their daily business. Mrs. Clark, the town's oldest resident, was out to get the morning paper when she noticed something unusual near the Thompson house. She squinted, trying to get a better look. It was still early, but she could see Jason, a handsome young mechanic, leaving the Thompson house. He looked nervous, glanced around as if to make sure no one was watching, then hurried away, clearly wanting to avoid attention. The Thompson house stood out in Lakewood, with its tall hedges, neatly trimmed garden, and old windows hidden behind heavy curtains. Michael Thompson, a successful but reserved businessman, lived there with his wife, Sarah, a striking woman with long blonde hair who always drew attention. Though she appeared charming, there was something in her eyes that often made people wonder about her true intentions. At noon, the town's routine was interrupted when a police car suddenly pulled up to the Thompson house, sirens blaring. The officers quickly got out and headed straight for the front door, causing a stir. Detective Lee took command of the group as curious residents gathered, eager to see what secrets might be uncovered in the normally quiet town of Lakewood. Known for his keen insight and attention to detail, led the team. He was a seasoned professional, and his appearance always meant something serious had happened. Mrs. Clark, looking out of her window, immediately sensed that something was wrong. Soon after, rumors began to spread. Something had happened to Michael Thompson. People came out of the house and gathered in small groups to discuss what had happened. Tension in the air grew, and the usually calm Lakewood suddenly fell into an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Upon entering the house, Detective Lee immediately noticed a foul odor familiar to anyone who had ever encountered a crime scene. Michael Thompson's body was lying in the living room. His face was disfigured when he died. At first glance, it looked as if he had been killed instantly without any chance of resistance. Lee looked around the room carefully. Everything looked too neat. As if someone had tried to hide the signs of a struggle, Sarah Thompson, who found her husband's body lying on the sofa nearby, a cup of tea in her hand, her eyes dry but with a mixture of horror and despair, claimed that she had found her husband dead when she returned home from a morning jog. Detective Lee listened carefully to her story and could not help but notice the strange detachment in her voice as the police examined the crime scene. Lee pondered the possible scenarios. Michael Thompson was a respected man, known to be a strict but fair leader. He had few enemies, but there were many rumors about his private life. Sarah, although she always seemed to be a devoted wife, was spotted with Jason more than once. Rumors of her possible romance have been circulating for a long time, but no one has taken them seriously, so far as Sarah Lee feels that her story is too orderly, as if she prepared her story in advance. There is something about her behavior that worries him, but there is not enough evidence to say anything yet. He decides to continue investigating, checking every detail, because in cases like this the little things can be decisive while the town is gripped by fear of an unknown killer. Detective Ives in the Thompson house is slowly but surely gathering evidence. Sarah and Jason are still suspected, but their relationship is still unproven, while the residents of Lakewood watch with concern and curiosity as events unfold. Realizing that their quiet lives have changed forever, evening has fallen in Lakewood, and the usually quiet and peaceful town is still seething with discussion about the recent incident. The murder of Michael Thompson has come as a shock to everyone. In a small cafe on the corner of Main Street, local residents gather to discuss what happened. Everyone wants to know more, but information is slow and fragmentary. At this time, Detective Lee returns to his office immersed in analyzing the first evidence. When he enters the office, Lee thinks about what happened. All the details of the case do not add up. Michael Thompson was a man of repute, but it seems his death was carefully planned. Sarah Thompson, despite her calm exterior, has aroused Lee's suspicions. Her attitude is too cold, Her answers to the detective's questions are too polished. This is unlike the usual response of a grieving widow. Lee knows that the key to the solution may be hidden in the little things he catches, starting with the most obvious, checking Sarah's alibi. She claimed that she had gone out for a morning jog when the murder occurred. According to her, she left the house at 7 a.m. and returned around 8:30 a.m. when she discovered her husband's body. But Lee was suspicious, so a police officer was sent to check the security cameras and interview possible witnesses. Meanwhile, work continued at the Thompson house. To gather evidence, the forensic lab staff carefully checked every nook and cranny, paying special attention to Michael's bedroom and office, where a safe was found inside, which contained important documents, including financial statements, real estate papers, and a will, but there was still no evidence pointing to a specific culprit. While the experts examined the evidence, Lee continued to interview the first witness, Mrs. Clark. She described that she had seen Jason leaving the Thompson house on the morning of the murder. This seemed strange to the detective, as Sarah had not mentioned Jason's visit. When Lee asked Sarah this question, she hesitated for a moment, but quickly replied that Jason had stopped by to help her with her car. This answer seemed reasonable, but Lee decided that Sarah's words needed to be examined more carefully. He brought Jason in for questioning. The young man, although he seemed a little nervous, answered the questions confidently. He confirmed that he had come to the Thompson house to help Sarah, but quickly left, as he had other things to do. Lee noticed that Jason was very careful in his answers, as if he was trying not to give too much away. This raised further suspicion in the detective as Lee continued his investigation. The atmosphere in Lakewood became increasingly tense. The town residents shared their speculations and discussed possible motives, but no one could believe that the friendly and kind Sarah could have been involved in such a terrible crime. The next day, Detective Lee received the results of the evidence analysis. Forensic scientists found traces of a stranger in the bedroom. We're finding Michael. This means there is someone else in the house besides Sarah. The trail is fresh, and Lee immediately realizes that this evidence could be the key to solving the crime. He orders any possible links between Michael and Sarah to be checked with a third party to narrow down the circle of suspects. As Lee considers his next steps, he feels the mystery starting to unravel. The connection between Sarah and Jason is becoming clearer, but he needs more evidence to prove their involvement. The detective understands that a long and difficult road lies ahead, but he is ready to go all the way to uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, the city of Lakewood lives in anticipation. Rumors spread faster than events unfold, and people begin to build their theories about what really happened. But the truth remains unspoken, and Lee knows that only he can bring this matter to a close. Day by day, the investigation gains momentum, and Lakewood sinks deeper and deeper into the darkness of a dark secret. Detective Lee continues to gather evidence and interview witnesses, trying to piece the disjointed pieces into a coherent picture. With each step, he understands more and more that deep and dark secrets are lurking behind the Thompson family's seemingly ideal and peaceful life. After Jason is questioned, Lee notices strange financial transactions begin to emerge. A financial expert is called in to look into Michael Thompson's affairs. It is discovered that large sums of money have been withdrawn regularly from Thompson's accounts over the past few months. At first glance, these transactions appear to be legitimate, but upon closer inspection, a closer look reveals that the money was transferred to anonymous accounts registered to fictitious people, which leads Lee to suspect that Michael may be involved in illegal activities, or that someone close to him has access to his money. Lee begins to dig deeper to find out how Michael is related to Sarah and Jason, who turns out to be a few years ago. Michael went through a serious financial crisis involving unsuccessful investments, after which he was forced to sell part of his business to cover his losses, but this did not help him get out of debt. During this time, he began to cooperate with Jason, who proposed dubious schemes to make quick money. Sarah, his wife, knew about her husband's affairs, but seemed to take everything for granted while still being with him. However, soon after starting to work with Jason, Michael's financial situation improved significantly. He was able to recover his assets and even buy new real estate, surprising his business partners. Lee began to suspect that Jason might be involved in the fraud and that Sarah might be his accomplice. One of the main things that caught the detective's attention was the sudden increase in Sarah's social media activity in the months leading up to the murder. Her page, which was previously filled with family photo and happy moments, suddenly became more private. Lee noticed that Sarah began to use hidden groups and private chats to communicate with someone outside her usual social circle. He requested access to her correspondence, which allowed him to discover a number of interesting contacts, including Jason. The correspondence between Sarah and Jason revealed new aspects of their relationship. They not only discussed the usual day-to-day issues, but also made plans involving money. In one of the messages, Jason mentioned the need to complete the case, which to the detective seemed like a clear hint of preparations for something serious. However, these correspondences did not provide direct evidence of their involvement in Michael's murder, which complicated the investigation. Meanwhile, Lee decided to meet some of Michael's former colleagues and friends to get a better understanding of his character and possible motives for the murder of one of them. David said that in the last months of Michael's life he seemed very stressed with him. He often complained about problems in his marriage but never said what they were. David also mentioned that Michael had said on several occasions that he did not trust Jason and that he might be involved in some illegal dealings. Lee realized that he needed to test another hypothesis. Perhaps Michael had found out about Sarah and Jason's plans and tried to stop them leading up to his murder. This would explain why Michael, who was known to be cautious, suddenly started acting strangely in his final days. The situation is starting to unravel, but evidence is still scattered. Lee knows he has a lot of work to do to prove Sarah and Jason's involvement. He decides to continue to follow them in the hopes that they will make a mistake that could reveal the whole truth. The town of Lakewood, meanwhile, remains tense. The residents watch the proceedings with interest and concern, sharing their theories about what happened in the Thompson house. No one can believe that such a peaceful and quiet family could be caught up in such a dark story. But the more they investigate, the more it becomes clear that behind the healthy exterior lies terrible secrets that eventually lead to tragedy. Each day the investigation becomes more complicated, and Detective Lee begins to feel that time is running out. Despite growing suspicions about Sarah and Jason, there is still a lack of direct evidence linking them to the murder of Michael Thompson. However, Lee knows that he has a chance of solving the case if he can identify a crucial flaw in their behavior or planning. One of the areas that Lee decides to investigate further is the calls and texts sent from Sarah and Jason's phones on the day of the murder. To do this, he enlists help of the cybersecurity expert, helps him recover deleted messages, and meticulously checks the work call logs, but soon yields results. The disk experts discover some deleted messages that Sarah sent to Jason a few hours before the murder. These messages contain short but meaningful phrases, as everything must be perfect. Don't forget what we agreed, nothing is. The following phrases cannot help but alarm Lee, as they clearly allude to some plan that they have to carry out. Sarah seems very aware that they can find her, and tries not to leave any traces. However, Detective Lee has come to believe that people involved in crime always make mistakes, especially if they are pressed for time. He decides to conduct secret surveillance on Sarah and Jason in the hope that their actions will reveal their true intentions. As the surveillance continues, Lee becomes more and more immersed in researching Michael's past and his business. He draws attention to an important fact. A few years Michael had previously bought a significant stake in a large construction company. It seemed like a good deal at the time, but problems began soon after the company became involved in a building regulations scandal, and Michael was forced to sell his shares at a loss. However, Lee noticed that just a few months before his death, Michael was interested in the business. Again, he began meeting with the company representatives and discussed the possibility of reinvesting. Lee decided to visit one of Michael's former partners, Robert, who used to work for this construction company. Robert was talkative and said that Michael was worried about recent problems in his marriage. He suspected Sarah was having an affair and even talked about the possibility of divorce. Lee realized that this could have been one of Sarah's main motives. Divorce would mean losing a significant portion of Michael's assets, which she had become accustomed to. This could have prompted her decision to get rid of her husband before he had time to cut ties with her. Lee also knew that Michael had been extremely cautious in his dealings with her. In the weeks before his death, He began regularly changing the passwords on his devices, encrypting his communications, and even installing surveillance cameras in his office, actions that clearly showed that Michael was suspicious and preparing for a possible threat. Lee went to Thompson House to thoroughly inspect Michael's office there. He discovered one of the cameras that turned out to have gone unnoticed during the initial search. Experts were quick to extract data from the camera, and what they found was a real breakthrough in the investigation of the recordings, revealed several meetings between Michael and Jason where they discussed financial matters. However, the most shocking thing was that in the final frames on the day before the murder, Sarah had come to Michael's office and started rummaging through his files. She was clearly worried that someone might catch her doing this and kept looking back at the door. Lee realized that Sarah was looking for something important, perhaps evidence that could convict her of something illegal. After receiving these recordings, Lee decided it was time to take more drastic action. He invited Sarah in for questioning, trying not to reveal his true intentions during the conversation. He mentioned the cameras installed in Michael's office, and looking at Sarah's reaction, her face paled for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure and replied that she did not know about the existence of these cameras. Lee noticed this hesitation, realizing that he had hit a sore spot as the interrogation continued. The EX investigators examined other records, including logs from mobile devices. It turned out that Sarah had called Jason multiple times on the day of the murder, despite her previous claims that she had not contacted him during this time. This fact allowed Lee to obtain a search warrant for Jason's home. Search documents were found confirming that Jason and Sarah had opened a joint account with a large sum of money that they intended to use after Michael's death. This new evidence began to add up into a clear picture. Sarah and Jason had indeed planned the murder to gain control of Michael's assets. Lee now had enough grounds to arrest him, understanding that they needed to be detained as soon as possible to avoid the possibility of escaping arrest. Sarah and Jason sent shockwaves throughout the Lakewood community, many unable to believe that such famous and seemingly prosperous people could be involved in such a terrible crime. However, Lee knew that this was only the beginning. He had to go through long trials in court, where every piece of evidence and every event would be carefully analyzed, but he was certain that the truth would soon be revealed and the perpetrators would receive the appropriate punishment. The fateful day had come. Sarah and Jason sat in a dark interrogation room, separated from each other, surrounded by cold grey walls that seemed to be closing in around them. Detective Lee had gathered enough evidence. Preparing for a decisive confrontation, it was now his job to not only prove their guilt but also force them to admit what they had done. He knew that the pressure and fear of exposure could cause them to confess. Lee first enters the room where Jason is. The young man looks nervous but tries to remain calm. Lee starts with simple questions that give Jason a false sense of confidence, but when the conversation turns to the money he and Sarah transferred into a joint account, Jason becomes visibly nervous. Lee shows him the documents confirming the approval of this transfer and asks how it relates to Michael's murder. Jason begins to struggle with his answer, trying to come up with a plausible version, but Lee pressures him, gradually drawing him out. Finally, Lee moves to the camera installed in Michael's office. He tells Jason that the recording shows Sarah rummaging through Michael's papers the night before he died. This statement, as Lee expected, hit Jason hard. He tried to deny his involvement, claiming that he knew nothing about Sarah's plans, but Lee continued to press for more evidence of their shared involvement in the plot at the same time in another room. Sarah was sitting across from another investigator, but her face remained calm. She seemed confident in her innocence, claiming that she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But when the investigator showed her the recording from the camera, she searching for documents, her composure begins to break. Lee watches the interrogation through the glass, noticing the slightest changes in her behavior. Sarah understands that the odds are against her. She realizes that her secret has been revealed, and now she is not only threatened with revelation, but also with severe punishment. But Lee knows that she has a weakness, fear of losing everything she has achieved the hard way. He takes advantage of this fear by reminding her that Jason could easily blame her to save himself. This statement confuses Sarah, Her confidence begins to crumble and she becomes more submissive. Lee asks her directly why she decided to kill Michael. Sarah is silent at first. That Sarah and Jason may have been influenced by each other, this increased their determination to act. However, this did not help them escape the charges. The court found them guilty of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. The verdict came a few weeks after the trial began. Sarah was sentenced to life without parole, and Jason was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The court took into account that Jason was a junior accomplice, but could not completely avoid the severe punishment for the residents of Lakewood. The verdict was a sign that justice had been served, but the bitterness of what had happened remained. The trial was over, but the town of Lakewood would never be the same. This crime had left a deep mark on his history, changing the perception of many who knew Sarah and Michael, could not accept the idea that such dark intentions were hidden behind their familiar faces, their friends and acquaintances. Michael, who not only lost him but also lost their faith in the stability of life, tried to find solace in the fact that evil had been punished. Detective Lee left Lakewood with a sense of accomplishment. After completing the case, he knew that justice had been restored, but this case left its mark on him. Every investigation changes a person, and this one was no exception. Lee understood that it was impossible to predict the secrets hidden behind people's normal lives, and crime can arise where you least expect it. In the end, the story of Michael, Sarah, and Jason became a warning to everyone that outward prosperity and success can hide deep inner conflicts and dark motives. This tragedy reminded everyone of the importance of paying attention to those around them and not accepting what lies on the surface as the truth. The town of Lakewood returned to a quiet life, but its residents will remember this lesson for a long time. A lesson of greed, betrayal, and fear, leading to the destruction of life and happiness.